Oh, hey. That one chip challenge really messed me up. Just been lying there on the floor all week, not moving. I know what you're thinking. Trevor, if you were just laying on the floor all week, how did you use the bathroom? And honestly, I don't want to talk about it. It was a rough week for sure. But thank God I had unspecified music streaming app to help me listen to all my favorite bands. I realized as I was lying there in complete and total agony that I listen to a lot of bands, and I have a lot of opinions on their discographies. So I thought that I'd make a new series where I rank my favorite band's albums from worst to best. And I have the perfect band to kick off this series. I should probably change first though, right? Yeah.
A few inches later.
Okay. Much better. Forgot my rings. Panic at the Disco was an integral band for me growing up. Along with My Chemical Romance and Fall Out Boy, Panic really helped shape my interest in pop punk, emo, and scene music. While MCR and Fall Out Boy are back in full force, touring and releasing new albums, Panic has decided to throw in the towel. And despite what your feelings about Brendan Urie might be, this video isn't about him. This is a video of a fan taking a look at one of his favorite band's discographies and ranking them. Keep in mind these are just my opinions. The rankings here are not definitive. It's just me having fun. Without further ado, let's get into Panic at the Disco, worst to best. Pray for the Wicked is probably Panic's... I don't want to be too hyperbolic, but I think it's their worst album. There's just not a lot of bangers on it. I don't find myself coming back to this one as much as, say, the classic early 2000s records. Apart from the singles, I can't really tell you what most of the songs on this album sound like. Imagine Dragons. They sound like Imagine Dragons. Although I will say High Hopes has grown on me in the past few years. This was Brendan at his most accessible and least creative. Panic was at the height of their fame in this era. I don't even think they were this big during, like, Fever or Pretty Odd. I mean, he was doing songs with Taylor Swift, who was also in her mid-period. There were hooks, but there wasn't a lot of substance. It really feels like this album was trying its best to be just another 2010s synthy pop album. And in a way, it succeeded. Too weird to live, too rare to die. Unlike Pray for the Wicked, this album has a plethora of bangers. Miss Jackson, Girls, Girls, Boys, and the all-time classic ballad, If You Love Me, Let Me Go. I fucked that one up. And the undeniable banger, This Is Gospel. This is gospel for the fallen ones. But like Pray for the Wicked, I don't find myself coming back to this one very often. It was Panic's sort of comeback album after a comeback album. It showed them going in a much more pop direction, which they worked with for a decade. I don't hate it, I just don't think it's their best work. This album is definitely more creative than Pray for the Wicked though, taking inspiration from German krautrock band Kraftwerk and deriving its title from a Hunter S. Thompson quote. That's one of the most Panic at the Disco things, man. Fucking Hunter S. Thompson quote, come on. It also helps that this album was produced by Butch Walker, like the maestro for like poppy goodness. Like this album came out when I was still in high school, so I do have a bit of nostalgia for it. Like if Miss Jackson were to come on and Target, you best believe I'm gonna be singing along. Miss Jackson, Miss Jackson, Miss Jackson, Miss Jackson. Death of a Bachelor. I used to not like this album. I would lump it in with Pray for the Wicked and sort of compare the sounds. I would say they sounded the same. But Death of a Bachelor managed to bring me back in. I forgot just how many bangers were on this album. Victorious, Don't Threaten Me with a Good Time, Hallelujah, Death of a Bachelor, LA Devotee, a personal favorite of mine. Even the deep cuts like Crazy Equals Genius and Golden Days just hit so hard. The album even had a bit of a resurgence in the past few years, with House of Memories going viral on TikTok. This was Panic's first album that had Brendan Urie as the sole member of the band. Spencer Smith had departed the band to work on his personal life. Dallin Weeks had become a touring member only, and then eventually left to start his own band. I don't know how, but they found me. I think this turned a lot of people off, and I think it kind of turned me off a little bit too. Everyone saw this as Brendan kicking everyone out, which isn't the case. I think a lot of people just saw this as, oh, well, why can't he just make it a solo project? But all in all, I still think this album is pretty decent. A lot of bangers, a lot of memories. Definitely one I come back to. Just another one, oh, just another one, oh, just another one, oh, just another LA devotee. Oh fuck, I'm filming. I think people are gonna be mad that A Fever You Can't Sweat Out isn't higher up on the list, but it's my list, so I'm gonna do what I want. This album is a classic. Undeniably. It didn't sound like anything else at the time. It was poppy, it was dancey, it was baroque, it was emo, and it was ambitious, especially for a bunch of teenagers from Las Vegas of all places. Actually, now that I think about it, a lot of bands come out of Las Vegas. Panic, The Killers, Imagine Dragons, who I mentioned earlier. But like, not a lot of bands were making albums that sounded like this. Maybe like The Faint, but that's about it. The writing is phenomenal. Ryan Ross really knew how to incorporate literary allusions and references into hook Latin emo bangers, making the weirdest references to things like Wes Anderson movies and like Douglas Copeland. Like, who does that? And Brendan's voice was so interesting at the time too, because the only other person who really sounded like that was Patrick Stump. Brendan's voice singing Ryan's word was just the perfect combination. And then when you add the rest of the band, just brilliant. So why is it so low on the list? While I do love this album, and I do consider it a classic, it just doesn't hit me as much as what's coming up next. Like, don't get me wrong. I love this album. But there's not that emotional resonance. Although catch me having a night drive singing along to Camisado, forget about it. This is the Senate skin on a linoleum floor. This is the center quarantine in a hospital. Pretty Odd, the Pinkerton of the 2000s. This album came completely out of left field. You thought it was crazy when Lil Yachty released a Pink Floyd-style psychedelic rock trap album last month, which fucking rocks, by the way. Imagine the cabaret emo theater kids releasing this anomaly back in 2008. Like, who would have thought that these guys would release, like, the best Beatles album that the Beatles never made? This album is great, especially since, like, at this time, you had a lot of people marketing nostalgia. You had bands like Jet and Wolfmother, who was kind of like a proto-Greta Van Fleet. This album manages to stand the test of time, where those other ones just kind of faded into just, you know, 2000s hipster blog nostalgia. It's definitely a standout in this band's discography. Trevor, if Fever and Pretty Odd are 4 and 3 on this list, what are your top 2? What are your top 2? Viva Las Vengeance. Hey, shut up. Shut up, this is my video. Controversial opinion, but I love this album. When it came out, it seemed like every rock-affiliated YouTuber was just lambasting this album. TikTok was tearing it to shreds. And I was sitting here wondering why. Before this album came out, I was in the same boat as everyone else. I was kind of over Panic since Pray for the Wicked. Sorry, I got a DM from my brother. Sent him the new Young Lean album. I said in a previous video, which has since been deleted and will not be re-uploaded if I can help it, that Panic would have to do something big to bring me back as a fan. And they must have watched that video, because this was that something. The album was recorded on 8-track tape machine in the year 2021. Who else is doing that? Tame Impala? No, you ain't doing that. It has that same retro vibe as Pretty Odd. But where Pretty Odd sounded like the Beatles and the Kinks, this album sounds more like Bryan Adams and the Police, in the best way possible. One of the complaints people have with this album is that Brendan's voice doesn't sound as good as it used to, which I don't think is true at all. I think his voice sounds great on this album. It's so raw. He's not depending on high notes like he did on Death of a Bachelor and Pray for the Wicked. It sounds more natural. Plus, the fact that this was recorded live on an 8-track tape machine makes me appreciate his vocals that much more. I know I'm probably gonna get shit for defending and praising this album, but I don't care. This is a quality album, in my opinion. It's some of the most genuine work Brendan Urie has ever done. And the fact that this is almost like a concept album about his rise in Panic at the Disco and as an artist makes it all the more better that this was kind of his swan song. And my number one Panic at the Disco album. Drum roll, please. That's enough. Vices and Virtues. This is my go-to Panic album. It's perfect. No skips. The songwriting, second to none. You would think that after Ryan Ross left the band that the songwriting would decline in quality. Doesn't. It also helps that you had Pete Wentz and Butch Walker and John Feldman helping out on songwriting duties, but it was their first real comeback album after Ryan Ross and John Walker left to form the Young Vanes and explore more of that Beatles retro sound. But Brendan and Spencer really knocked it out of the park with this one. It took the sort of Baroque steampunk style of A Fever You Can't Sweat Out and sort of gave it a more poppy spin. This album was on repeat for me in high school. Even after high school, this became a sort of safety blanket for me. It was one of my go-to drinking albums, and if you don't know what a drinking album is, don't worry about it. Just no matter what, this album has been perfect. And I can't say that about a lot of albums that I listened to in high school. Hell, I can't say that for a lot of albums that I listened to last year. There's albums that stick with you for a lifetime, and this is one of them for me. That's why I decided to dress like that era of the band. But Vices and Virtues, it's got the songwriting, it's got experimentation. I mean, some of the songs even end with weird sort of bits that have nothing else to do with the rest of the song. I don't know what you call them, but I think they're pretty fucking cool. And I think out of all of Panic's albums, if one had to stand the test of time, it's gotta be this one. For me, at least. Hey, hey, you are a hurricane, anchors in a storm. We'll never be the same, a fire in a flask to keep us warm. You know, I know that they don't look like me. Alright, so that's my ranking. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? But let me know in the comments what you think. Let me know your own ranking. Like I said, I do plan on making this series, and I have a lot of bands that I love that have pretty decent discographies. So expect more of these. Like I always say, be sure to subscribe to my channel. You know, my last video where I did the Hot Chip Challenge, it got a lot of views, but my subscriber count just stayed stagnant. If you want to see fun videos, or just, someone having fun while making content, give me a follow. I plan on doing a lot more, music content. I'm a giant music nerd, and I always wanted to talk about music on camera. I've done it on this channel before, to varying degrees of success. So if you like music content, subscribe. I'm still trying to hit 100 subscribers by summertime. And if I get 100 subscribers by summertime, I have something special planned. I'm not going to tell you what that is. I'm going to wait until I get a few more subscribers. So if you want to know what that is, tell people to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and that's the end of the video. Goodbye.